Good afternoon. All right, quick show of hands. How many of you have never heard of visual snow syndrome until today? It's okay to raise your hands, okay? Good, that's almost everybody, which is really good because that means we're going to all learn something new today. And how many of you, by show of hands, are wondering what in the world a topic like visual snow syndrome could possibly have to do with tinnitus? It's okay, you can raise your hands because when I was in your spot, I was wondering the exact same thing myself. Well, my purpose here today is attempt to inform you about 3 things that might be of interest to you regarding visual snow syndrome in relationship to tinnitus. And my hope is that this information will provide valuable to doctors, practitioners, researchers, and patients that are dealing with bothersome symptoms like tinnitus and are interested in knowing a bit more about the neuroscience behind tinnitus. But first, we need to begin with a quick story. Friday, February 7th, 2014 was a pretty usual day for me. I spent my day at work writing software and analyzing data, and that evening I had dinner and drinks with a few friends. But there wasn't anything really odd about that day other than the fact that I had a slight headache in my left temple, but it wasn't really painful, it didn't really bother me, so I didn't think much of it. I went to sleep relatively early, got a good night's sleep, and everything seemed pretty normal for that day and for that week as a matter. However, when I woke up the following morning, I had quite a bit of brain fog, general difficulty thinking, reasoning, concentrating, but I assumed I was just a bit groggy that morning, so I didn't really think much of it and started my day. However, as I got out of bed and got ready for the day, I noticed that I had this pins and needles kind of tingling sensation all throughout my body, mostly noticeable in my hands and my feet. And I assumed I was just coming down with some kind of like weird cold or flu, so I didn't really think much of it, and I just kind of went about my day and kind of laid low for the rest of the day. The next day, however, I woke up and I noticed that I had continuous ringing in both of my ears. And now this seemed pretty odd to me because I hadn't been exposed to any really loud noises the previous day or anything of that nature. And as I opened my eyes, I noticed that my entire field of vision had a slight static to it, like looking at a slightly out of tune analog television. And now this really started to concern me as I've never seen anything like this before, so I scheduled an appointment with my general practitioner for the next day. Over the next few days, I noticed a series of odd visual, auditory, and tactile symptoms. First, I'd never seen a floater in my life until that week. However, my vision was now completely filled with them, even in normal lighting conditions. In addition, I was seeing after images after looking at objects just for a fraction of a second. It's similar if you're to look at one of these images for a few seconds and then turn away, and you can see the after image. Well, this was happening with objects even against relatively low contrast backgrounds and only looking at them for a fraction of a second. I also started to notice tiny bright speckles that would zigzag in my vision across solid backgrounds, specifically blue backgrounds. The same ones you'd see if you were to stand up too fast or get hit in the head. However, these didn't go away, and I couldn't not see them. They were just always there. About a dozen or so other continuous symptoms emerged over the course of that week, including visual symptoms like constant vibration while I was reading text on a computer screen, trailing positive after images in addition to the negative after images, difficulty with bright sunlight, more difficulty than usual seeing at night, and halos around all bright objects at night, like the halos around the lights at night. Additional auditory symptoms including difficulty with semi-loud noises appearing annoyingly loud now, difficulty isolating a single person's voice in a conversation against background noises, and difficulty blocking out kind of noxious environmental noises while I was working. They just always seemed to pop into my attention. And this weird kind of clicking noise that would happen every time there was an abrupt change in volume level as I was listening to music or some kind of audio. And other tactile symptoms as well, like a localized buzzing sensation that would focus primarily in my hands, my feet, and my thighs, and it would kind of pulse on and off every couple of seconds or so. And something that felt like tiny muscle tremors, primarily in my hands and feet. And various other symptoms like fatigue, irritability, and a few others as well. All of these symptoms persisted except for the brain fog, which luckily went away after just a few days. My general practitioner ran the standard battery of tests. However, everything came back normal. He said he wasn't sure if he should send me to an audiologist, an ophthalmologist, a neurologist, or some other kind of ologist. So out of ideas, he eventually recommended that I go see the Mayo Clinic and see if they could help me out. I spent 2 weeks at the Mayo Clinic getting pretty much dozens of tests from some of the top specialists in the US. They said I had a bit of dry eye from an unusually dry winter, some high-frequency hearing loss, which seemed pretty normal given my background, gastrointestinal distress from all of the stress of not knowing what was wrong with me, and a bit of situational anxiety as well now too, because I still didn't know what was wrong with me after several months. However, all of my tests, including a full MRI, came back normal, and eventually they concluded that my symptoms were most likely something that they referred to as a central sensitization disorder. Central sensitization is an upregulation of a specific sensory input in the central nervous system, which leads to a hypersensitivity of that specific sensory input. They see it most common in chronic neuropathic pain patients, like patients with fibromyalgia. However, in my case, it appeared to be creating a hypersensitivity in my vision, hearing, and sense of touch. They didn't know what caused it, there was no known cure, so they suggested that I reduce stress, eat healthy, get regular exercise, take a yoga class, and maybe learn how to meditate. They also strongly encouraged me to take anti-anxiety medication temporarily to prevent my situational anxiety from growing into something much worse, like a general anxiety disorder. Then, just learn to manage my symptoms, wait it out, and see if things would improve over time. So I started researching central sensitization in preparation to develop my recovery plan. While doing so, I stumbled upon an article that had been released about a month earlier called Visual Snow, a Disorder Distinct from Persistent Migraine Aura. The article discussed a rare, or at least largely unknown, neurological condition referred to as visual snow. The article described visual snow as continuous tiny dots in the entire visual field, similar to those of an analog television. And now this obviously sounded quite familiar to me. The article went on to describe visual snow syndrome, which is a cluster of symptoms that are found highly prevalent with visual snow. These symptoms include palinopsia, which is seeing after images, increased entoptic phenomena, like seeing an unusual amount of floaters in your vision, and bright zigzagging specks that would fly around against solid blue backgrounds. Photophobia, which is difficulty dealing with light, nyctalopia, which is difficulty with night vision, and surprisingly, continuous bilateral non-pulsatile tinnitus. I was essentially reading a list of description of symptoms that almost perfectly described what I had been experiencing over the past few months. The following month, a second article on visual snow was published in another medical journal by the same lead researchers. The article attempted to provide objective evidence using functional brain imaging that visual snow was in fact a real and objectively measurable disorder. In addition, that it was a disorder distinct from migraine, migraine with aura, psychogenic disorders, post-hallucinogen perception disorders, and other diseases with similar symptoms. The most important finding was the observation of areas of the brain with hypermetabolism that were more metabolically active in the PET scans of 17 patients with visual snow compared to healthy control subjects. The two areas of hypermetabolism were the right lingual gyrus, which is involved in visual memory and higher order functions of vision, and the anterior lobe of the left cerebellum, adjacent to the left lingual gyrus, whose key function for vision as we currently understand it is extraocular motility. So you might be asking yourself right now, like, well, why is this important and what does this have to do with tinnitus? Well, to answer this question, first we have to look at a list of the symptoms associated with visual snow syndrome and their statistical prevalence. So the first item of interest is the high prevalence of patients that present with both visual snow and tinnitus. In the first study of 78 patients with visual snow, 62% reported having continuous bilateral non-pulsatile tinnitus. In the second study, which was expanded to 120 patients, 64% reported tinnitus. And now, this seems like a pretty interesting coincidence. Even more interesting is that all of these symptoms seem to manifest themselves as some kind of noise in sensory modalities or an increased sensitivity to sensory stimulus, which makes this noise more prevalent. There are a few hypotheses that have been proposed to explain how these symptoms might be related to one another. First, it has been proposed that visual snow syndrome may be the result of cortical hyperexcitability. This hypothesis is that neuronal hyperexcitability leads to a detection of subthreshold stimulus like visual snow syndrome that a healthy individual would typically not detect. Second, it has been hypothesized that visual snow syndrome may be the result of a thalamocortical dysrhythmia secondary to dysfunctional neuronal excitability and impaired habituation response. Coincidentally, this study found that 63% of its 32 visual snow syndrome patients also reported tinnitus as well. This hypothesis is based on the observation that color filter lenses primarily in the blue-yellow spectrum subjectively reduce visual snow in 92% of 12 patients. They theorized that there may be an imbalance between the conio and parvomagnocellular pathways that underlies the thalamocortical dysrhythmia and thus the visual snow symptoms. Finally, I've had several discussions now with a group of neuroscientists from Newcastle University that are working on a predictive coding model for tinnitus. They hypothesize that predictive coding may also provide an explanatory model for visual snow syndrome as well. Predictive coding is based on a Bayesian interpretation of how the brain works. Essentially, it assumes that the brain models uncertainty and makes predictions based upon Bayesian statistics, or according to Bayesian statistics. In this model, tinnitus and other positive perceptual disorders, like visual snow, may be the result of prediction error in the brain. While these 3 explanatory models are still theoretical, they could demonstrate that tinnitus and visual snow syndrome are connected by a common underlying pathophysiological mechanism. More importantly, this new understanding may lead to rational treatments for tinnitus and other positive perceptual disorders like visual snow someday, and show that they may have a common underlying pathophysiology. While there's clearly some interesting research happening in the world of both visual snow syndrome and tinnitus, it will likely be many years before we have a thorough understanding of the cause of tinnitus and effective methods for treatment. So what can be done in the meantime in order to manage these symptoms? Well, let me start by being very open and thus a bit vulnerable by telling you that I really struggled with managing my symptoms when I first was exposed to these symptoms. Things actually really weren't looking good for me at all. Bothersome tinnitus is tough by itself, but imagine having a constant noise in your vision and your sense of touch as well, and you've essentially got a recipe for disaster on your hands. My struggle with managing my bothersome symptoms led to considerable stress, anxiety, sleep issues, difficulty concentrating at work, and eventually depression. To be completely honest, things were really not looking good for me. However, the Mayo Clinic armed me with the tools that I needed in order to build a plan to eventually learn how to manage my symptoms. And now, please keep in mind, I'm not here to either endorse or condone any specific form of treatment or symptoms management methods. I'm just telling from my own personal experience what worked for me given my specific set of symptoms. First, I was able to identify factors that made my symptoms worse. My symptoms still exist, even to this day, 24/7. However, certain things make them noticeably worse. In order of most to least aggravating, they are stress, like giving a public presentation, lack of sleep, cold and flu, alcohol, or more specifically, the hangover that follows the alcohol, caffeine, excessive computer use, too much sodium, and too much sugar. So I tried to minimize these factors as much as possible to help keep my symptoms in check. Doing so, I changed up my diet and to eliminate things that made my symptoms worse. In addition, I tried to eat healthy food specifically to give my body and my brain the nutrition that they needed to heal and stay healthy. I also increased my physical exercise as well. This helped tremendously with managing stress, anxiety, and depression. In fact, this photo is me of my first 100-mile bike ride, and I've done, I think, 4 since then. I really like riding my bicycle now. Yeah. I also started practicing yoga, and this was even more helpful for me than the exercise for managing stress and anxiety. Yoga teaches you how to calm your sympathetic nervous system, which is your body's natural fight and flight response. It does this by intentionally activating your sympathetic nervous system through movement and physical exertion, and then teaches you to calm it back down again through mental focus and breath awareness. What has been most helpful for me so far in managing my symptoms, however, has been meditation. Meditation, like yoga, teaches you to calm your sympathetic nervous system in the face of painful or pleasurable thoughts, emotions, or physical sensations. And this is done through the use of focused breath awareness and monitoring of thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations. In addition, it helps with concentration, maintaining non-judgment, and minimizing cravings and aversions. However, it took a lot of time, the right instruction, and quite a bit of hard work in order to teach my brain these new beneficial habits. And now, I think it's very important to note that I'm a very rational and scientific person. I don't subscribe to any New Age beliefs, any mysticism, or any of that quantum flapdoodle. So I was quite skeptical when the Mayo Clinic had told me about yoga and meditation as a potential method to manage these symptoms, even after several experts had recommended this. However, over time, I've learned that there's actually quite a bit of strong scientific evidence to support that meditation, when done properly, can have tremendous benefits for managing chronic bothersome symptoms like tinnitus. In fact, I could probably talk for hours on the subject of mindfulness and meditation. However, due to limited time and attention spans, I'd just like to show you a bit of my own empirical evidence to help support or back these claims. So each morning during my daily meditation session, I connect my fingertips to a biofeedback device. The device essentially is measuring galvanic skin response, also known as electrodermal response, which acts as a reasonably good measure or proxy for sympathetic nervous system activation. This device also measures my heart rate and heart rate variability as well, which also act as proxies for sympathetic nervous system activation. So these measures also can tell us about the opposite state of affairs, homeostasis, or the body's natural resting and recovery state. So I collect these data from each meditation session each day so that I can analyze them using statistical software like the programming language R. So on the x-axis, we have time, starting from my first meditation session after the Mayo Clinic to today, this was the first time I gave this presentation at this conference last year. And as you can see in red, we have all of the average galvanic skin, on the y-axis here we have the average galvanic skin response from each meditation session. So each of these points represents the average galvanic skin response from each of my meditation sessions each day. As we can see, the data points start out relatively low here at the beginning because of the anti-anxiety medication that the Mayo Clinic had prescribed. But as they eventually tapered me off of the medication over time, you can see that my sympathetic nervous system response grows progressively worse. However, the data points in blue here represent my average galvanic skin response after I attended a 10-day meditation course. During these 10 days, I was taught how to meditate according to the Vipassana tradition of meditation. In addition, during those 10 days, I had to confront my symptoms 24/7 without any distractions. You couldn't have cell phones, no computers, no TV, no nothing. Essentially, you're meditating for up to 10 hours a day for these entire 10-day block of time. So as you can see, this is pretty much a night and day difference in my ability to manage or regulate my own stress response in response to the symptoms that I was dealing with every day. And I'm continuing to improve even to this day. In fact, I've updated this graph to include all of the data now since the last time I gave this presentation up until today. And as you can see here, I ended up going on a public speaking tour that lasted like, I think it was a month long, and then I did another one that's a month and a half. The data points in green, however, are now data points based upon doing a neurofeedback-based meditation. So I purchased a consumer-grade neurofeedback device that essentially helps you with the meditation practice each day. And as you can see, these initial data points so far, even though this is only about a month or two of time that I've been using this, are looking quite promising. So, and I realize that this is a case study of just one, but I'm hoping that this information might get some of you interested in using mindfulness practices and meditation for the use of managing chronic bothersome symptoms like tinnitus. So for me, mindfulness practices like yoga and meditation have been extremely helpful in learning how to turn my bothersome and stressful symptoms into more manageable symptoms. In addition, it might sound counterintuitive, but I now honestly believe that it is possible to be in mental, emotional, or physical pain, but to not be suffering from that pain, because suffering is essentially how we respond to that pain. And so while I still have to deal with these symptoms every day of my life, I'm very happy to report that I'm no longer suffering from them anymore. So if you're interested in learning more about any of the topics we discussed today, I have links to all the articles that we saw on visual snow syndrome, in addition to articles that are essentially trying to look at a common underlying pathophysiology between visual snow syndrome and tinnitus. In addition, future research is currently happening as we speak. The lead researchers from the first two studies on visual snow syndrome have completed a third study, and we're hoping that the results will be released sometime this year. In addition, they're trying to spin up a fourth study that will involve more brain imaging. However, they're currently trying to secure funding in order to make this study happen. Unfortunately, since visual snow syndrome is a relatively rare, at least relatively unknown in the medical community, there's not many people that are interested in researching this or funding the research for it. So all four of these studies have been largely funded by individuals like me that either have visual snow syndrome or know people that do. So if you're interested in helping move this research forward, please consider making a donation to the Ion Vision Foundation using the URL below. It's a legitimate, tax-exempt, nonprofit organization, and all proceeds go to studying visual snow syndrome. Finally, if you're interested in learning more about mindfulness and meditation, the best source of academic information I've seen on this topic is a video lecture series by Professor Ron Siegel from Harvard University called The Science of Mindfulness. It contains 12 hours of information on what we currently know about mindfulness and meditation from a completely scientific perspective. However, if you're interested in learning how to practice meditation, the best thing I can recommend is taking a 10-day Vipassana meditation course. You'll spend up to 12 hours a day for 10 days, essentially learning how to meditate in an ideal learning environment. It's completely non-religious, there's no weird stuff, everyone's super nice, the food's great, and it's all based on a pay-it-forward system. I really like what this organization has done. It's essentially, it's like a boot camp for creating really good habits for your brain. So in conclusion, I hope today we've learned at least 3 things regarding visual snow syndrome and tinnitus of interest. First, we learned that visual snow and tinnitus are related in the sense that approximately 63% of patients with visual snow syndrome also have tinnitus. This should be of interest because it may point to a common underlying pathophysiology between visual snow syndrome and tinnitus, or at least some subtypes of tinnitus. Second, we demonstrated that research into visual snow syndrome is providing novel insight into tinnitus, and this has created additional explanatory models that might help explain how tinnitus operates, like the cortical hyperexcitability, thalamocortical dysrhythmia, and predictive coding. And third, it may be possible, or at least for me, it was possible to manage symptoms of visual snow and tinnitus through the use of diet, exercise, and mindfulness practices like yoga and meditation. So I hope that my story will serve as inspiration for those of you who either care for or deal with chronic bothersome symptoms like tinnitus and visual snow syndrome. Finally, if you only take one thing away from this presentation today, let it be this, that it is possible to be in mental, physical, or emotional pain, but to not be suffering from it, because suffering is how we respond to pain. Thank you.